Welcome to the 68th Annual Conference of the Utah State Historical Society. I'm Holly George from Utah Historical Quarterly, and today we have the pleasure of learning about teaching Utah with primary sources. Our speakers are Wendy Rex Atzet, Lisa Barr, Melissa Coy, and Scott Bassett. And with that, I'll hand the microphone to Wendy.
Thanks, Holly, and I would like to begin by welcoming our presenters. Three of us, as you can see, all work at the Utah Division of State History, and Scott is joining us from the Topaz Museum in Delta. I'm going to begin by just giving a brief overview of the resources that we've developed with the Utah Division of State History for teachers working with students with primary sources. That is kind of the common thread through everything we'll look at today, is that these are resources that focus on bringing primary source analysis into your classroom. And all of these resources can be accessed through the Utah Division of State History website on our K-12 resources page. And you can see the URL here. Many of these resources are new that we've just put together to release for the upcoming school year, because we know that with the pandemic, teachers don't know whether they'll be teaching in classrooms or online. And so all of these sources live online and lend themselves really well to teaching in an online or blended learning environment. So these are free resources that are digital and are available to teachers all over the state. And they focus on teaching with Utah histories. And even if you aren't teaching Utah studies, these kinds of resources can be useful to you if you're teaching geography, if you're teaching US history, or even, I would say, civics and government. You can find something to use in these resources that can provide a local case study for something that you're working on in that class. So we offer 5 flexible lesson plans. They focus on the development of railroads in Utah, mining and immigration, Utahns during World War I and World War II, and the Topaz internment camp near Delta. And then we also are revealing very soon some new primary source sets that will be a little more like a museum exhibit. And they are going to focus on the Salt Lake Olympics, on foodways from Utah, and on Utah's national parks and monuments. So today we will go over some of those materials, but not all of them. Now, there is a real difference in getting kids to step up the way they think about using primary sources. And it's the difference between using a primary source to illustrate something, like a picture in a book, using that primary source to help the students explain something that happened, and then finally getting students to the point where they can actually analyze those primary sources and start to do their own thinking and draw their own conclusions about that topic, working from that primary source. So depending on the students that you're working with, how old they are, how familiar they are working with primary sources, they're going to fall somewhere along this continuum. And that's fine, but recognize that we are always aiming to have them do a little bit more with those primary sources than they were before. And hopefully to move beyond that, this is just a picture of, Brigham Young, but that's all it is to them. We really want to help them take those steps to advance their thinking and get to the point where they can do analysis on their own. So luckily, there are wonderful resources out there already developed for teachers to use to work their students through this process. And I would boil a lot of the research and the tools down to 2 key points in helping kids learn how to think like a historian. The first point is that they need to build the context. They really will struggle to make sense out of primary sources if they don't have a good grounding in that topic already. So as a teacher, you really do need to build that context for them kind of before you unleash the primary sources. You really do, that would be putting the cart before the horse. We really need to have the horse in place with that historical context before you ask them to start working with those primary sources. And then the second key is giving them the tools to question those sources and really begin thinking about them. So one really wonderful tool to help students do this is created by the Library of Congress. And I feel like this tool is great for emerging historians, students who are younger or who have done nothing like this ever before. This is a wonderful tool, and they call it their Observe, Question, and Reflect tool. It's easy to find this on in the Library of Congress teacher resources, and they actually have an online tool that students can fill in these boxes online as they are working with sources. And it really does a good job of outlining what kinds of questions they can ask and giving them good prompts. So the first step in this process would be to have them just observe the source. Observe the source. What is it? Is it a newspaper? Is it a poster? Is it a photograph? Is it a historic map? That's really the first step. And then help them to notice things in those images or texts, large details, small details, and then question that source. Who created that? That is one of the key questions that students should always be guided to ask about a source is who made this and where did it come from? When was it created? Why was it created? What was its purpose or goal? And then move to that reflection. And they will move back and forth along this continuum. It's more iterative than it looks in this image. But then they can start to begin thinking about that source and what it tells us about that time or place. You can prompt them to say, to investigate what kind of point of view is this source showing? And then to compare and contrast it to the other sources that they're working with for that same event or place and time. Now, there's another really wonderful set of materials out of the Stanford History Education Group. And I love this one too. It is, I think, better suited for more advanced students who have done this kind of work before, or older kids. And I say that not because it's methodologically really different, but the language is a little more advanced. And again, it's an iterative process. It's not just a step 1, step 2, step 3, but we'll start, or we'll have students place that source in the historical context, and then they go on to sourcing, where they do question the source. Then I like this idea of close reading, where students are encouraged to really examine the messaging that is happening in the source. And then corroborate, another really big word that I think will probably confuse kids who haven't done this kind of work before. And that's what I would call compare and contrast. And making sure that kids have access to sources that show different perspectives so they can really put them into a dialogue. And so I think this tool, also available online and really widely used, is great for more advanced students. So now I'm going to talk about some student activities that I've done working with kids through the National History Day program, based on some of the resources that are in our flexible lesson plan that's about Utah women during World War II. So the image here you see of our Rosie the Riveter is probably, if you said to students, when you think of what women were doing during World War II, what is it? And they're going to think of this picture, right? Because it's so widely known. However, our primary source set has probably more than 40 pages of different primary sources that are going to let kids explore women's experience during this war living in Utah. And they range from photographs of women working in different military installations, women working at the Manti parachute factory, And then we have this wonderful, wonderful historic pamphlet or booklet that focuses on the Utah Minute Women. And this was an organization that was networked throughout the state, where women supported the war effort through different kinds of salvaging programs. And so we'll look at a few pages from that book here and talk a little bit about how students might use them and how they might access them. So this is one of the opening pages in that book, and students can look immediately at the image, which shows a housewife handing some scrap from her household directly to a soldier, and then it becomes part of the machinery of war. That is an image that students can analyze, and it will open kind of their thinking about what kinds of things women were doing to support the war effort. And then you can move down to the text where they immediately start talking about the use of nylon and silk and how those commodities were frozen for the consumer market early on in the war because they were needed for war production. And then you can move students into the book. And what I did when I used this packet with a group of high school students is I divided up all the pages, and I divided the students into small groups and gave each group a set of pages, and then as a group they would study those pages and then present them back out to the class. And then by the time they had gone through all of the sources, the kids had a much broader view of what women were doing during the war. So here's another page from the Minute Women book. The image quickly shows them that saving fats from the kitchen was a big deal during the war. And the image says, "Save used fats. Rush each canful to your meat dealer." And the fats, like bacon grease or beef drippings, or particularly in rural Utah, elk and the fat garnered from animals that had been hunted, women would gather them up and turn them in, and then they were used to make explosives. So I think this is another one of those little moments in history that kids would find not just fascinating, but could then talk about, what do we do that's similar today? And this is something that should look familiar to them from today, the collection of tin cans. So I think the text that accompanies this image is fascinating because in 1943, the Salt Lake City Commission had to pass an ordinance making it illegal to put any tin cans out in the garbage. They all had to be salvaged and turned in through the Minute Women organization to go to the war effort. And then, just for your interest, here's an example of just the quantity of these salvage items that were collected over the course of the program from 1942 to 1945. And it's pretty phenomenal. So as students work through individual materials together in small groups, and then they can come back and share, that sharing process gives them that chance to actually do the analysis, because it's one thing to read the source and think about it as you are reading it, but then as they have to verbalize and share, they really do have to take another step, because they have to be able to explain what this is telling them and how it fits into this larger story. So that's my example from World War II women. And now I'm going to toss it to Lisa, and she's going to talk about one of our other lesson plans.
Thanks, Wendy. So I'm going to talk about immigration and mining in Carbon County and that lesson plan. This lesson plan highlights immigrant groups that came to Carbon County for better economic opportunities, such as coal mining in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. 33 different nationalities lived in Carbon County in 1920, and this illustrates that Utah was culturally diverse for quite some time. And most immigrants came to the area on the railroad and lived in company mining towns. And this photograph, which I just love, is of an Italian immigrant, Joseph Romano, his daughter Josephine, and their dog Mussolini at their house in Castlegate in 1918. Next. And this lesson plan can be used for teaching Utah history, and Wendy touched on this as well, but it can also be used to teach American history or civics and government, by connecting what was happening in Utah to national themes such as immigrant experiences, Americanization and assimilation, diversity and discrimination, conflict and cooperation, industrialization, transportation and migration, and then labor and economics. And teaching local history is a great way to help students make personal connections to where they live and help them understand why history matters. And Wendy, if it's possible, I'd like to pull up the lesson plan and just go over it briefly. So the lesson plan structured, the first part is for teachers. It's a narrative for teachers to prepare to teach the lesson. And then on the right is about the primary sources that we used and where we got them. And then Wendy, if you'll scroll down just a little bit. And then there's questions that teachers can use in discussions with their students. And just scroll a little bit more. And then we also have a list of all the ethnic groups and nationalities that lived in Carbon County. And then we also have a student portion that teachers can assign the readings before we start engaging in the primary sources. And then if you'll just go to the map. And so then we start getting into the primary sources, and this is a map of Carbon County that shows all the mining towns along with other landscape and cultural landmarks. And then you can go back to the slides now. And so each primary source, we provide context, a link to the actual source, and then discussion questions to go with it. And next slide. And so now I'd like to go over the types of primary sources that we use and how educators might use them. This is an example. These are two examples of homes in mining towns. The left is of the Bassett family, who built this house from rocks out of the nearby canyon near the Castlegate mine. And they used this home as a boarding house for Italian immigrants that were coming into Carbon County in the early 1900s. And the photo on the right is of the town of Kenilworth. That's a traditional company town. It was built by Independent Coal Company, and it's an example of a typical company town where the company owns all aspects of the town, including the homes, the retail shops, and the schools. And just as an example, teachers could use these photos, and there are a few more, to compare and contrast how the different towns were structured and how people lived. Next slide. And then we also have some artifacts that are from our state history collection for students to analyze. On the left is a mining sign written in 7 languages: English, Greek, Italian, Hungarian, Croatian, and Japanese. And this demonstrates the diversity and potential language barriers when working in the mines. And the dress belonged to a Slovenian immigrant who came to Carbon County via boat to New York City, and then by train to Sunnyside, Utah in 1907, where she met her fiance, and they married the first week that she arrived. And he came to Carbon County a year earlier to work in the mines as a mechanic. So, and then Wendy had a great comment about using this dress and that it's in color, and it takes kids out of the black and white photographs that people are used to, because sometimes we forget that the past was in color. Next slide. And then finally, we have some oral histories that students can read and analyze. These are a few excerpts from an interview with Elias Den, whose parents immigrated from Denmark to Carbon County in 1906 after converting to the LDS Church. And I'm just going to read these excerpts. As for mine disasters, there was a Castlegate explosion on March 8, 1924, and 173 men were killed. I was only a wee lad at the time, but I was hired as a water boy to go in behind the rescue crews and carry water for the fellows to drink. I remember distinctly they were carrying the bodies out there and how bad I felt about it. As far as my education was concerned, I finished 9th grade, and then my parents, being from Denmark, thought when a boy reached the age of 18, he should earn his own living. So I got a job in the mines loading coal and used to go to the mine every day, unload 6 3-ton cars and drill holes, lay my tracks up to the face and set 2 timbers one day, and the next do the same. The mine company would shoot the coal down to you at night, and we were paid 79 cents for every ton of coal we loaded. And I think the oral histories that we have are so rich, and these are just 2 short paragraphs that can help students discuss child labor and then also like the dangers of working in the mines. So, and then next slide. And then to wrap it up, I'd just like to share some thoughts about how to make connections with the past to the present, just with a few questions for students to think about. How has Utah changed since the early 20th century? How has work changed? And then what does it mean to be an American, specifically, with all these immigrant groups coming in? They had very different experiences than people have been living in Utah earlier. So, and then also think about like the immigrant legacies that you see in Utah right now. And an obvious one is the Salt Lake City Greek Festival that's held annually. And there's also a Greek festival in Price because a lot of the Greek community came to Price in Carbon County to work in the mines. And it's just a great opportunity to also ask students, what other cultures and traditions do you see in your community? And if they have any of their own. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Scott Bassett, and I am the secretary of the Topaz Museum Board in Delta, Utah. I've been there for about 12 years. Also, I'm a retired educator after 39 years in the Millard School District. I was a teacher, principal, and curriculum director. And I thank everyone at the Historical Society for this opportunity to meet with you today. I love the title of the presentation, Topaz, Teaching Hard History. Japanese American World War II internment is indeed hard history. And now, more than ever before, it is a very relevant topic. Lessons are to be learned from our tragic past. Could you go ahead and move to the next slide, please? Now, how did this lesson plan basically come to be? The Topaz Museum was awarded an educational grant from the Great Basin Heritage Area Partnership. The award was $8,000. We send out invitations for schools in Utah and White Pine County, Nevada, to apply for a grant. 28 grants out of 105 applicants were funded for the 2019-2020 school year. Each school received a resource library worth approximately $400, books and materials, lesson suggestions, etc. We invited the recipients to attend a background knowledge pre-visit to the museum and site, where we took them through the museum, we took them to the site, etc. The Topaz Museum personnel, me basically, visited schools also. I spent a couple of days in some schools, spent 45 minutes in other schools, just giving background knowledge before the students actually came to the museum. Like was mentioned earlier, it is so critical to have that knowledge before you really learn about what is going on. Topaz Museum, we also sponsored field trips to Delta. Sometimes there was funding from the Great Basin Heritage Area Partnership, because some school districts don't allow field trips or don't pay for them. And then there was this glitch called COVID-19, and you know the rest of the story. We completed almost half of our grants that were funded. We still have 15 to go, and we will continue those as soon as possible. Go ahead and go to the next slide. As a part, we worked closely with the Utah Historical Society, and Lisa Barr helped create a lesson plan for us, which was absolutely excellent. And the teachers really appreciated that amazing lesson plan. So, ta-da, let's go ahead and roll forward to that lesson plan, and I'll just share some highlights. Actually, if you could just go to the lesson plan. Not this slide, go back, and now the link, basically. Awesome, great. So let me just kind of give you an overview of how this lesson plan works. The first 3 pages, there's some excellent background knowledge that Lisa has prepared for us. It's a minimum, but it's an adequate if you don't have time to delve into the history more than that. On page 1, take note of the questions for young historians. We will come back to that in just a minute, but those are excellent, excellent questions. We'll circle back to it, like I say, a little later on. On page 4, sorry, you were just there a minute ago, you'll note the sources, and the sources are excellent. I would like to highlight just a couple of them. As you scroll down, you'll see one that says KUED, Topaz Residence Photograph Selection. I would really encourage using the photographs that are there. We won't have time to look at them right now. The next one that is absolutely fantastic, phenomenal, is Mountain View Elementary's high 3rd grade masterpiece of our daily diary. It's written by 8 and 9-year-olds basically, and it gives the insight of camp life from the aspect of a child, and it is a treasure. We have people come through our museum and we have a full copy of it, and that is really one of the highlights of the museum. So I'd encourage using that as part of your resources. Mine Okubo's Citizen 13660, there's nothing better than that. It is just short little paragraphs that talk about sketches that Mine made. She's a renowned artist, and she made sketches during camp. And it's one of those Where's Waldo type books also, because you find Mine in each one of the sketches. So that's always kind of fun for kids. And then of course, for younger students, grades 3 through even 8, there is the historical fiction book, Journey to Topaz, written by Yoshiko Uchida, which really gives an excellent background. Now, if you'll scroll forward to page 5, you'll find a student reading exercise. And now if I were teaching this unit, I would locate 3 or 4 other readings, and I would divide the class into groups, which we kind of talked about a little bit earlier, and to have them, each of the groups, develop an expert poster about their particular reading assignment and then share that out. It's a great way of getting a lot of information covered in a relatively short time. Now, additional readings could come, actually we won't scroll forward to it, but on page 20 of this lesson plan, there's also a great short synopsis of what camp life was like by Yoshiko Uchida. That could be used. We'll also talk in just a minute about Leonard Arrington's The Price of Prejudice. That is seminal work on Topaz internment, and you can easily grab some excerpts from that. So scroll forward to the picture section. As we all know, pictures are worth 1,000 words. And on pages 6 through 12, also page 21 and 26 of this lesson plan, there are some great conversation starters that could be used based on the pictures. I would encourage that you could find additional pictures on the website. That KUED part right there, there are additional pictures there. What I would do is I would distribute the pictures to the class members for a think, pair, share type activity. Ask the students to describe what they think is, and I just show the pictures only. I would just give the pictures only to the students. Ask them to describe what they think is going on in the picture and how they feel about it. If you scroll down, I think it's 2 or 3 pictures farther. It's the one more, a couple more. Let's see, one more. This one right here. I love this picture. This is of the Tanforan racetracks. A lot of people that come to the museum have no idea that the Japanese Americans were interned in horse stalls while the camps were being built. So, you know, if a child looks at this picture, they're going to be thinking, you know, well, what's really going on here? They'll be drawing some conclusions, etc., saying how they feel. And then if you scroll down just a little bit on this particular page, there are some excellent, it explains what the picture is, etc. And I love that the mattresses in Topaz were filled with straw. They actually weren't mattresses, they were body bags that were filled with straw. So when you discuss those types of things with kids, after they've looked at this picture, you know, it takes a whole new meaning on itself. That could even be a great teaser to start the unit with. In the olden days, those were called anticipatory sets. May I draw your attention to pages 13 through 19. Those are excerpts from the daily diary, the third grade daily diary that we talked about, and they would be great for kids to read through. There is a full color version of the diary online at the Utah State Historical Society, so you can click on that link and explore several of the other pictures that are available. Now, for more advanced students, there is no better topic for discussion than the loyalty questionnaire, and that is shown on pages 22 through 25 of this lesson plan. You can get some really deep conversations based on that loyalty questionnaire, in particular questions 27 and 28, which if you filled this questionnaire out, and everyone ages 17 and older were required to fill this out, if you answered those questions if you answered no to those questions, you were deemed disloyal and you may be shipped off to a high security camp in Tule Lake, California. Now, this lesson plan is an excellent place to start, but if you go back to the next slide on this, we have additional resources that we would recommend. So it's the next slide. First of all, there's nothing better than an actual visit to the museum and the site. Then there's the Topaz Museum website. We won't look that one up because right now there's a problem with the website. But unfortunately, it's great. It has all sorts of information. We've just redone it. That's probably why it's down. And it is really, really a valuable source. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Leonard Arrington's work on Topaz really tells you everything you need to know. It's facts, it's figures, it's history. And if you'll touch that link that is under right there, yeah, that'll take you to the Topaz Museum website, which this link is actually working. And you see we have the book, The Price of Prejudice, right online. So you don't have to buy it, you don't have to worry about it, you can just read it right online. And then one more, if you'll go back to the slide one more time. The last one that I've listed is the Densho Digital Archives. If you'll click on that for just a sec, the Densho project basically is interviewed. There are a lot of oral histories by people that were interned in the camps, and it is an excellent resource. You can listen to interviews with those people. So those are great resources. If you'll go to the next slide, I've just suggested some ways that you can teach this lesson. Of course, it's so relevant. I mean, you can explore current civil rights issues, Black Lives Matter, LGBT, immigration, white supremacy, etc. They all tie in with this history from the past. I love the idea of talking about fake news. A lot of people think that, fake news is something new. Well, it's certainly not. And during World War II, there was the fake news of we have to intern these Japanese American people because they are a threat. So it's a military necessity, which was absolutely not true at all. You can compare that with COVID-19 falsehoods that circulate, etc. Then I suggest maybe the following compare-contrast activities. How are these things alike and different? You've got internment, imprisonment, concentration, forced migrations, reservations, even camps, like we just discussed with living in the Carbon County area, etc., California Gold Rush, etc. Now, back on that very first page, if you'll remember, of the lesson plan, Lisa gave us some excellent questions for young historians. So that's a great way to enhance talking about this difficult history as well. Invite museum personnel to come to your classroom. We're more than happy to come. We would prefer coming after you've given the lesson so that kids have a background knowledge. Otherwise, it's just not quite as meaningful, and we've learned that by experience. And of course, the best thing that you can probably do is schedule a field trip actually to the museum and site. To do it really, really well, it takes about 3 hours, but we can do it in less time than that. We understand school schedules. And we'd recommend that you schedule with us a couple of months in advance. If you'll go to the next slide, please. Now, we always need to assess student learning. And so what I would recommend here is, these are just a whole bunch of different ways that you could do it. There's the traditional paper pencil examination. You could research a topic. It could be a personal choice. It could be teacher assigned. Create a PowerPoint presentation. We received from, let's see, Ogden High School, excellent power. As part of the grant, they also had to return information to show us what they learned. And we had some phenomenal PowerPoint presentations, movies, other media that came in from that school that we're excited to share with others. Publish a newspaper talking about the things that you've learned. Perhaps it's the Wakasa shooting. Maybe it's excursions to Delta outside of camp. Maybe it's an overnight scout camp at Antelope Springs, etc. You could write a letter to a friend. I used to do this with my fourth graders. They'd write to a friend, an imaginary friend back in California, tell them what was going on. Also encourage them to write a letter to a political leader. Design a welcome to Topaz guidebook. Construct a replica of the camp, etc. Those are just some ideas. And to wrap this unit up, if you'll go to the very last slide, of paramount importance, above all else, please instill in your students the mission of the Topaz Museum, which is taken from the biblical book of Genesis. Let there be no strife between me and thee, for we be brethren. And then, of course, the message is exemplified in the Norman Rockwell famous painting, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. This is the essence of our message at the Topaz Museum. We want people to play nice with each other, and then these tragic events would not happen. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Melissa Coy, and I'm a digitization program specialist and digital archivist for State History. And I'm excited to introduce you to a project that we've been working on that will help educators incorporate primary sources into the classroom for both in-person classroom discussions as well as just some distance learning initiatives. This project was worked on by State History's curatorial staff and myself. Sabrina Sanders, our artifacts curator, Lisa Barr, our manuscript curator, myself, and Wendy has been overseeing all of this, which has been great. And so we've been coordinating together to produce these sets. We have several objectives. I'm going to go ahead and kind of talk and try to share my screen at the same time, which is a little tricky, but I believe in me. Let's see. All right, so here we have our primary source sets. You can access this. We're going to have links to this on the UEN site, and then you can also access this through State History's webpage, and under Library and Collections, we have a digital exhibits link. But we have more than one digital exhibit in this collection, or in our in this program. And so, in essence, like, you really could use all of the different exhibits to as primary source sets if you wanted to. But here we have some that we've explicitly made for teachers. Now, we had a few objectives here: to create primary source sets with an understandable background and with information and discussion questions. We wanted these sets to be easily ingested into an educator's teaching plan. We wanted to avoid duplicating content from curricula that had already been developed by our own staff, as well as by others like Better Days 2020. We wanted to provide primary sources that lend themselves to analysis and discussion at an appropriate grade level. And this means a preference for some visually stimulating material, or cropping large documents to a paragraph or two. And opening up the idea that primary sources can include a variety of materials, which we've highlighted here already: documents, photographs, artifacts. We also wanted to ensure that these little mini exhibits looked nice on the tools that students are already using, so Chromebooks or tablets or phones. And we wanted to provide access to these items on a platform that would allow for flexibility in future edits or adding new content. And so we've been using omeka.net for our all of our digital exhibits, and basically I feel like it's my new toy, so it was a great opportunity to see how this new toy works for primary source sets, to make these little mini exhibits. We wanted to, of course, the final goal here is to pique kids' interest and to get them hooked. we want to show them that history is fun and always relevant to our present. So on the left here, we have a few topics, and of course this is still all under construction, so that's my disclaimer. But by the time this is out, I think these will all look pretty good and clean. But we have a few topics that we kind of identified here. And I want to click on the Winter Olympics one because it is the most done and it is pretty visually stimulating, I think, because it is all in color. Now, you know, when teachers go to teach the 2002 Winter Olympics, I don't know if you're like me, but what do you teach, right? The sports history? Do you teach, you know, who won the gold? Kids may not relate to that. So what we try to do here is set the stage for just showing how kind of the local excitement that Utahns had to in hosting the world and showing our home to the world, right? And showing what we know is a beautiful place to everyone, and as well as our unique history and our resources. So what we tried to do was emphasize too, from a child's perspective here, that there had been a lot of people who were motivated to volunteer. There were only 23,000 positions available, and over 70,000 people applied to volunteer. And then also, you know, just that kind of excitement of seeing the torch come through your town, or the Light the Fire Within music program that had been developed specifically for elementary school students, and all of the kind of assemblies that had taken place at schools all across to kind of like help hype this excitement. But I think one of the things that we are, you know, we have a lot of materials in our collection. But what we tried to do is narrow it down to pin collecting, because pin collecting is probably one of the most accessible ways for everyone to kind of be involved in the games. And so we have a little bit of a background history about where pin collecting comes from, and it originates with the 1896 games. So that's a fun little fact. And then we did, you know, curate this collection to include a number of different kinds of visually appealing and easier to understand and analyze images from the pin collection. So as you go through these, you can see the item with a little bit of an explanation of what it is. And then if you click on the item, it will take you to information about this source. So what its title is, what subjects we have it categorized under, its description, who created it, where it comes from, all of that important source information that you need when you're assessing primary sources. And then at the end of this, so here's our images. And so we have here some questions. To take a look at each of these pins and to ask, you know, what do you see? What is the subject? Why do you think this subject was selected for a pin? And is this image unique to Utah? And then, you know, to turn it over to the students and ask, you know, what do you think about this? How is Utah presented to the rest of the world here? And do you think this presentation is accurate? Do you see anything missing? And, you know, what histories do you think should be included here? And then, you know, to also get them to think about their own lives and their own communities, we have a little activity suggested here that if the Winter Olympics were held today, what would you want to share about Utah with the world? And so we encourage students to design a pin with your family's or your community's history. And then we have sources as well if teachers or students want to kind of dig further into finding out some more information about the topic. We have a few other, I do want to just kind of go through another way you can look at our primary sources here. You can browse collections up at the top. All of our digital items that are in this program are organized by different collections. So if you wanted to come at it from a different point, or if you want a little bit more flexibility, or you feel like you want to, dig deeper in some way and take a look at these, you can, and it'll show you as a gallery kind of. So here we have our images in the collection. And these are just going to be just direct primary sources with no context. But they are nice and handy and all in one space. So, yes, stop sharing. So by the time you see this presentation, these primary source sets will be farther along and ready to use in the classroom. And this project is part, I think, of a larger initiative among archivists. This primary source literacy is driving the Society of American Archivists, which is the organizing professional body for the archival profession. And so SAA is encouraging archivists to coordinate with educators in making primary sources accessible for meeting learning objectives. We plan to add content moving forward, a bunch of different topics, and as always, your friendly neighborhood archivists here at State History are happy to help you with your primary source needs.
Well, that wraps up our presentations for today. We would like to thank you all for tuning in, and we hope to see you online taking advantage of some of these resources during this year, and they will be there, for future years as well. So we really hope that this gives you a step in the right direction towards being able to effectively integrate primary sources into your teaching. Thanks so much.